Much of the Western world today hates the rich.
Summed up in the phrase, eat the rich. But kids, I've seen your media consumption and I've seen your social media posts. You can't fool me. You don't hate the rich. You hate that you ain't the rich.
Even in the United States, where Donald Trump recently won re-election, his advisor Steve Bannon told Puck News, "I quite frankly think the wealthy and the billionaire class should bear the brunt of any hardships to come." And that's the right-wing party. He went on to give an ominous warning, saying, "I keep telling the wealthy, unless this changes, you're going to have a French Revolution in this country." And in the Western world, they're coming after wealthy people on what feels like a buildup to a new French Revolution. As I travel the world as the Nomad Capitalist, I don't see this. In just recent months, from Colombia to Armenia to Indonesia, I meet people who tell me they have no need to move to the West because their countries are growing, they see more opportunity than ever for themselves, they want to get rich living in their countries, and they feel more optimistic than ever. The idea that people are fleeing these emerging countries to move to the West may apply to lower income people, but I see every day how it doesn't apply to middle and upper income people who have everything they need in their own countries to succeed now. That's increasingly changing in the West, and that's what sparked the election of Donald Trump. That's what's sparking a number of populist and right-wing movements around the world. People in the Western world are fed up that it's not as easy to get ahead anymore. I recently read an article in The Economist about the fallacious case for abolishing the rich. It laid out how, in the Western world where people feel frustrated, unelected bureaucrats want to cap your net worth at as little as $1 million. I guess that would outlaw paying cash for about half the houses in the Western world these days. And the article explains why, no matter which party is in power, becoming successful is increasingly out of vogue in places where people used to feel like they could get ahead, but now they don't. We've been telling you this for years. If you live in a high-tax, legacy brand country like the US or Canada or the UK or Australia, life is going to get harder if you are an entrepreneur, if you have wealth. Because out of the days of admiring hard work that built success, and in are the days where frustrated people paint with a broad brush anyone successful as purely lucky or having inherited it. Now, my suggestions over the years have been pretty simple. Get a second passport in a second country so that you always, for the rest of your life and your family's life, have somewhere to go when the first starts flying. Get a residence permit in a third country to expand your options. Own a home somewhere else and have assets somewhere else. You can set up offshore bank accounts in countries like Ecuador with as little as $100, or in Singapore with a couple $100,000, or in Switzerland with $1 million. You can set up offshore trusts to protect assets against a judiciary that may increasingly join the zeitgeist and be against those with money, as we increasingly see. You want to make sure that you have options. And at Nomad Capitalist, we believe those options should be geographically diversified. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Because when the hate the rich mentality becomes too much, or taxes become too high, as if they aren't already, you can go to one of those other places and escape the decline. A small handful of our clients even take the ultimate step of giving up their country's citizenship to fully divorce themselves from the high taxes and the politics and the chaos. But let's dive into this article from The Economist, and I'll give you more ideas as we go. By the way, if you want my team's help in creating that plan B to protect yourself and your wealth, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. But as The Economist tells it, there are two new books that argue for doing away with the rich. Not in the Pol Pot sense of murdering them all, as I've seen firsthand in my many trips to Cambodia, another emerging economy where people are doing well, increasingly so. But for the writers, it says, a Dutch professor of ethics and the director of a left-wing British think tank, they are impeccably nice about wanting to take away as much as 99% of your wealth just for the lulz. Rather, these people favor policies that would make it impossible to have what they call, quote-unquote, too much money. Because when has anything ever gone wrong when people at left-wing think tanks thought you had too much money? And how much is too much, The Economist asked? That's an interesting question, because there are people in Cambodia who have less than the average poor person in the UK. How much is too much? Why don't we take from everybody? It is a slippery slope. But Ingrid Robiens of Utrecht University in the Netherlands, the author of Limitarianism, not libertarianism as we talk about it here, but limitarianism, as in limiting yourself, thinks that the state, the same kind of state that created Pol Pot and many others like him, should prevent anyone from accumulating more than $10 million or pounds or euros. It is a rough figure because the goal isn't actually to cap wealth or solve problems. It's to make sure that Ingrid Robians doesn't have to feel so jealous that you've done more and worry themselves about that. In addition to this hard political limit, she thinks there should be a much lower ethical limit. In countries where the state pays for healthcare and pensions, no one should amass more than $1 million in savings, and society should scorn anyone who does. That's something that increasingly happens, and it's something that our clients tell us, that the country they're living in now isn't the country that they remember. It's not the country that fostered hard work and innovation. And sure, the U.S. still has some kind of spirit of entrepreneurship, but it also has a growing spirit that we see from all sorts of different polls, particularly among Gen Z, but about across all generations, that people shouldn't become too successful. And do you know where they don't scorn people? In places like Dubai or in Singapore, or honestly, even in emerging economies where I spend my time, like in Kuala Lumpur, where we host our annual event, Nomad Capitalist Live. Scorning is what they do in places where your best days are behind you. It's like when a relationship ends. If the other person is really angry, it's like they feel powerless. They feel out of control. If they had the power, they wouldn't feel so out of control. And the sign of decline in high-tax legacy brand countries is they hate the people who create jobs and actually turn on those people as if job creation and providing value is bad. But The Economist continues with the story of Luke Hildyard, who runs the High Pay Center in London and whose book is called Enough, as in you have enough money. Not you haven't worked enough or you haven't paid enough taxes. There's never enough of that. But you have enough money. He stops short of calling for an absolute cap, but suggests something close to it. No one should earn more than the current threshold for entering the top 1% of taxpayers, he believes. In Britain, that was over £180,000 a year in 2021-2022 tax year. In the United States, it was about $330,000 in their 2021 calendar tax year. Redistributing additional income or wealth beyond this point, or enacting policies so that such riches never accrue in the first place, has no real downsides, he claims. So you go out and build a business and you'll be capped at £180,000 per year, no matter how much value you provide. The downside, of course, which Mr. Hildyard fails to see, is except that it's unfair and that people can get a better deal elsewhere, something that the West also seems increasingly opposed to: competition. The very idea that Western countries like the United States were built on free market capitalism is increasingly itself out of vogue. The idea that if you can move to the aforementioned Dubai or Singapore or Kuala Lumpur and pay substantially less, if anything at all, in taxes is anathema to people who believe, well, how come you get to go and do that if I don't? How come you get to make more than $330,000, but I don't? They don't see the point that there's a free marketplace and that people get to, as we say, go where you're treated best. And it's always amused me how many people tell those like me and our clients who have left our country for greener pastures, good riddance, or don't let the door hit you on the way out. But when I lived in the U.S., I paid a lot of money in taxes. Taxes they will no longer get from me and Nomad Capitalist clients, and taxes that I presume they wish they still could get from us. The real downside is those countries, those legacy brand countries, get less money. They create fewer jobs. Our company has 100 people working for us, and none of them are where I was born in the United States. The people who don't understand the downsides, like Luke Hildyard, don't understand that having fewer rich people means less in tax revenue, and don't understand that there are far more options that we've always told you about, that you wouldn't have gone to Singapore 50 years ago, or Kuala Lumpur 30 years ago, or Dubai even 15 years ago. But now you can. And it's jealousy that makes other countries not want to keep up. The authors offer, says The Economist, many reasons for loathing the loaded, and that sounds pretty accurate. They are bad for the environment with their private jets and their occasional holidays in space, as if I can almost count the number of people who have been on those holidays in space on my hands, should count against millions of hardworking people who've built wealth. They aggravate housing shortages by owning multiple homes. Some of them by political influence, which apparently is the problem of the rich and not the politicians and the state that they so much want to empower to take all of your money. A privatist might tackle these problems directly by taxing carbon emissions, allow more homes to be built, tightening campaign finance laws, or cracking down on corruption. The problem being is they don't want to solve those problems. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to lift a finger. They want to sit in their ivory towers in their left-wing think tanks and tell you how you should change your life, tell you how you're no good. The moment you have a crossword for them, they shut you out. You've crossed their boundaries. You're to be absconded from as being rude. They don't want your feedback. They don't have any ideas beyond just telling you why you're bad. And they certainly aren't able to actually effectuate the kind of change that they want. That's why they don't have pragmatic solutions. But the article continues that for Ms. Robians and Mr. Hilliard, everything depends on cutting the rich down to size. We have empowered people who have never created anything to take from those who created everything. They make a reasonable point, says the article, that the marginal benefit of an extra $1,000 is greater for the poor than the rich. A hungry family could buy food for months. A banker might blow that on a single dinner. Of course, doesn't include the effect on the rest of the economy, not including the wine, it says. The authors go further, blaming rising inequality for a host of ills. A radically more equal society, they say, would be less stressed, they argue, no rat race, and more cohesive, less envy, when perhaps people should find jobs they enjoy, and people should find content with their life. The same reason people attack you for saying, oh, if you have money, does that mean that you think money is the only thing that matters? You know what I've realized is that people with money are the ones who think it actually matters the least. They have it. They're comfortable. They don't sit around, in most cases, obsessing about it, unlike the authors of these books. And so the Economist article continues with more drivel from these do-nothing think tankers. But what I know is that human nature wants to succeed. People want to create value. People want to have an impact on the world, and that's not going to change, particularly from those uniquely different people who become entrepreneurs, who invest in things, who want to be part of the future and bring a vision. And no think tank, no country's tax policies will change those people. But even take people going back to the Beatles, when the tax rates get too high, I don't care what your politics are, you are going to get fed up. And I think that the pendulum perhaps will swing too far. There are places that you can go. Do you know what I don't hear in these other countries, the ones that we've talked about here for years, the emerging countries that do not make the news, in many cases in the West? I don't hear much about a great reset or other things that fearful Westerners talk about, because they've been, in many cases, through the rough patches far more recently, and they've decided now that it's their turn to be successful and their turn to be free. And so if you're concerned about growing political sentiment, much of it now in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, and throughout Western Europe, the lesson to take away is that if you live in those Western countries, you're going to want to have a backup plan. The US has no tax incentive for entrepreneurs. The last time Donald Trump was president, he lowered your taxes under 3% to a full 37% more than countries ranging from Vanuatu to the UAE. The average entrepreneur in the United States does not have a corporate tax setup where taxes went down substantially. They pay taxes as individuals, or they have a company that is now taxed less, but eventually they take money out of that company and they pay again, and the taxes add up. There's no case where the United States is going to have lower taxes than even the UAE, where they added a 9% corporate tax. It's not going to have lower taxes than a non-dom tax country in Europe. It's not going to have lower taxes than a tax-free country in the Caribbean or in the South Pacific, or territorial tax countries in Latin America or Eastern Europe, or lump sum tax countries in Western Europe. And for many politicians, even without any substantial tax incentives, they're not taking enough of your own money. Donald Trump in the United States may be a temporary reprieve. He's not lowering your taxes to zero. Meanwhile, the UK is embarking on a huge scheme to raise tens of billions of pounds in additional taxes from, well, you guessed it, the rich, those people who shouldn't have the money. Because after all, what is wealth confiscation above $330,000 a year or above $1 million in savings, if not a 100% tax rate on everything else you have? We're seeing this in the form of wealth taxes being talked about in the United States. We will have to wait until 2026 to see what happens in the midterm elections and how much of Donald Trump's agenda will be allowed to get in, and what happens in 2028 when he is leaving office. The reality is the people, the culture of these Western countries are what fuels the left-wing think tanks think you shouldn't have more than $1 million. And even if they came orders of magnitude different from that, they could still come in with a 70 or 80% tax. We've seen it in the last decade in France. We've seen other countries talk about it. Politicians in the US and Canada and elsewhere want to bring back or institute wealth taxes. There's talk of more countries taxing you no matter where you live so that you can't even leave the country, no longer use the services without paying. That's why I believe you need a second passport. You need some form of asset protection plan for your finances. It's what we do for our clients at nomadcapitalist.com/apply. It's what we talk about every year at our live event, Nomad Capitalist Live. But what I will tell you is this. When I was recently in Oman filming the latest edition of our Live Like a King series, people just weren't upset. They weren't angry. They weren't attacking others. There's a sense of community. There's a sense of camaraderie. Nobody seemed in my conversations and just in the vibe to want to take your money. These people all live in a country where success is very lightly taxed, if at all. And it's proof to me that there are cultures where wealth is not only accepted, but it's celebrated, where building something great is still in vogue. If you live in the West, that's not what you're living with. And yet, in most of the rest of the world, people still believe in success and enjoying that. The most important thing for you to get away from the think tank set is realizing most countries aren't like yours. Your country's in decline, and this is what comes as a result. Find a country to go where you're treated best, where they think differently. It's not the politicians, it's the culture.